Alright, this is a new project. It's going to be kind of analysis intensive, so if that's not up your alley, this is not the project for you. But here's the idea. We're going to take two hands that I think are easily remembered. In this case, our hand on the right is kind of a classic FF8 hand. Squall and Cypher, of course, have wonderful play together. Kyros plays really well off both of them, off the 10s and 9s and 6s. Adia has quite a nice fit. There are lots of situations where, for instance, Squall has landed in 5 and Adia goes in 7 and suddenly Kyros is just a bomb anywhere. So it's not just using a rare for the sake of using a rare. You'll notice there's not a recapture for the rare. The idea is actually that it fits quite nicely into what the hand is doing, and Irvine provides power for the far corner. If you were going to improve on the hand, you'd probably flip out Irvine for something not from FF8, but it does provide some things the rest of the hand doesn't do. Adia is also the only card with an A to the right. Important to have that in the hand. The hand, and this hand has been played a lot. Delial plays it a lot, but some other people have certainly played it over the years. I think Midas has played it in some recent event, meaning since the return. The hand on the right is an FFTactics hand I put together. I think A873 and 73A8 maybe Islud and Meliadoul. It's probably what I'll call it from now on. Might not be the correct names. I should look that up, shouldn't I? We can probably do that quickly without interrupting the video too much. Figure out the actual names of the cards over there. Because the whole point of this is for these to be cards you'll remember. And the advantage of it being memorable is like you could write down the numbers on cards and play games out with yourself and figure them out well and have a sense of them. Okay, so A873 is Meliadoul Islud and 73A8 is Vormav. So 953A is Delita. We got a big corner here. It fits a corner we don't have yet. Ramza and Delita. Ramza's the A595. Have nice play together. The 9s into A's lead to a lot of same walls potentials, as does the two sideways 5s. First the A on Delita, the 5 on Delita to the 5 on Ramza. These cards just have like surprisingly nice play together. Maybe not that surprising, but really do find ways to be useful together. 7A74 kind of fits the last corner, gives a 10 in the last direction, and in general, it's really nice for a hand to have both horizontal and vertical double numbers. It gives good coverage of 10s in a lot of spots. It doesn't give the kind of immediate coverage of corners that your Wakas and your Lulus do, but it down the road often gives pretty impactful coverage, and it's nice to have both so you can pick and choose which you want to hold on to. If the game starts with the bottom row filling up, just playing random cards, maybe you decide, okay, 7A74 is going to have really good play above 10s going up, especially if Squall stayed in the hand. But A595s, 5s to the sides, maybe not so relevant, maybe I'll get rid of that one. Stuff like that. Anyway, I think they're both reasonable hands, and we'll get into them more as we go, but the important thing I wanted here was two hands that could be remembered. So this is the FF8 hand versus the FFTactics hand. I think if you look at the cards from those sets, these are the hands you're likely to end up making. And if you've played a bunch, you're likely to have a good chance to remember these cards. And that makes it easier to kind of think about and explore in your head or in other places when you don't have the cards in front of you. And what we're going to do is basically go over kind of every possible starter from either player. So there are 45 potential starters because there are 9 squares and there are 5 cards. There are 2 players. We'll switch who first turn is at various points. So there's 90 total starters. And just talk about the merits of each starter and talk about kind of what kind of game it leads to. And more importantly, what we can learn about the starter type, both when and why it might be good, and how we should react to it. And we're going to start with the most simple version and build out. So this is the kind of easiest episode for me to put together of this series, but future episodes may be harder for me to put together or more complex to explain or understand. But that's sort of the goal, is if we just kind of completely learn one or really 2 possible games of Triple Triad, one with FF8 first turn, one with FFTactics first turn, but sort of just one core game of Triple Triad, how much can we learn about seeing different starters, reacting to them, what we want to do? And that's what we're going to try to put together here. And I hope it's an interesting ride. Didn't mean to make that move. One thing I'm missing, there are a few things I'm missing with this example, so I hope to eventually include other hands, is these hands have minimal double number corners, right? So we're not going to see starters like Squall in 9 well covered by the hand, because the hand does not have a recapture in 6, right? So there's a very common starter type that we're not really going to see here. These hands look a bit more, in one way, like really good randoms, like fantastic randoms, rather than constructed hands. Because most people will build constructed hands with very specific starters in mind. And these are both hands where I think you're going to look at what the opponent has, you're going to look at what you have, and you're going to try to figure out a way to exploit it, rather than having, here's some preset patterns. When I was doing a hand matrix comparing hands, Delial mentioned this hand, and then I said, okay, for me to put hands in, I have to have 1 or 2 intended starters. What's the intended starter? And Deli was like, well, sometimes I stick one of the top 3 cards in 5, sometimes it goes in 2 or 8, sometimes I play a corner. Like, it's not a 1 or 2 starter hand. It plays a lot more like a random. And so I think there are some types of starters we're not going to really be able to look at here. There's a lot of side starters where you have a recapture card with a high number facing out. We can't really test that here. The hands aren't built to do that. The hands aren't built to have recapturable strong corners, so we can't really test that here. So there's going to be stuff that we have trouble looking at here. And so it might be that the conclusions we draw are more relevant to randoms, but I'm hoping the next hand I include, if I continue this project, will give more insight into how to play with and against those types of hands. One other thing, and I think this is a little less obvious, is because these are relatively traditionally built hands, right? Not in the sense that they are built for a starter, but in the sense that, they each kind of have a card for each of the 4 corners, and then either an up-down or side-to-side card, right? You have to squint maybe a little bit with Cloud Eris on the FFT hand, but it's basically 4 corners plus Ramza. And if you look at the FF8 hand, it's 4 corners plus Kyros, right? So these are pretty traditional orientations of a hand. And that is kind of different from what you get in a random. Because one of the really strong reasons to do, for instance, a weak corner is because you got 2 or 3 cards for the same corner. So your hand, maybe you got 3 cards for 1, right? Your hand is really directed towards 9, and dumping one of those cards in 9 both gets it out of your hand, and you're still overweighted towards 9, so want the action facing there. So a weak corner can both get rid of a problem card or redundant card, and also give you kind of a target that your hand is aimed at. That's a lot harder to do with traditional 4-corner hands. For instance, if we start with Squall in 1, we might say, okay, that's a weak corner, easy to take back. But it's actually not that easy to take back. And part of the reason is our best card at attacking Squall in 1 is Squall facing up left, right? We've just gotten rid of our up left card while directing the game up left. And so I think one thing we're going to see here as compared to randoms is weak corners will not be very dangerous here, because fundamentally they now direct the game in the direction we're worst in. And it's pretty easy to figure out why that would be, right? If you are equal in all directions, to play a weak corner, you must have given up the numbers highest facing in your hand in that direction so that the lowest numbers are facing out. So that must now be the direction we are weakest facing. Now, hands usually won't be perfectly balanced. Kyros faces to the left as FF8's extra card. Ramza faces both up and down as FFTactics extra card. So there's still going to be some extra power in those directions, potentially. But it does mean not only may this not show kind of some traditional strong corner stuff, but it also won't show some weak corner stuff. Though that weak corner stuff tends to be less relevant in tournament games and more relevant in randoms, which is not to say people don't play weak corners in tournament games. It's to say I think they can come with a little more force in randoms than they do in these tournament games. But other than that, we're just going to look through these hands, and we're going to look at starters. And there are 90 possible starters. Today I'm going to walk through 16 of them. Somehow we've already been going 10 minutes. I don't know how long this will take. And today we're going to be looking at Sac Corners, so kind of the dumbest type of these starters. Which is not to say it's impossible for them to be good, and we'll see some ones that are decent. but corners where there's just not a recapture. So, for instance, squall in 9, right? Red does not have a recapture in 6. And this should really draw us to just taking an 8. And there is the question of how to take an 8. And we have 2 different ways to capture an 8. And one thing I really want to work on today is identifying which is the better way to capture. Now, one thing to do is check what can be comboed back, but here neither can be comboed back, so we don't have to worry about that one. We will have lots of examples of that. But I'm going to look at the top one first, A8, 7, 3. I think a pretty obvious move for red to make now is to recapture safely. And here we see a big problem. Because we took their starter, thinking from the view of the second turn player for most of the time today, with a 10 facing towards 5, that's inherently going to be safe. And if they have a good capture in 7, suddenly they can lock in 2 safe cards, and to have a good situation, we're really going to have a decent L. Now here, I think we do have a decent L. We can play in 6. Note, that move in 7 was their only tie. Every other move than this loses. But that doesn't mean we had great winning chances, because I think this is a very easy move to find and play. We can play here, setting up Delita in 5. And now, it is a pretty tricky position still for FF8 to play, actually. Any move in 5 is actually losing to 3. For instance, if you don't take, I have safety here, and it's pretty easy for me to build out. Also, both your cards that don't take have a 10 facing towards 5, so I threaten to play this with powerful effect at some point. And if you do take, all I have to do is take back, because neither of your cards can go in 2 without being comboed by Ramza, which is really powerful here. Not there, my bad. Here. And so 5 is actually losing here, and you have to find something more careful. This is a tie. This is a tie. It does give up the combo in 5, so you really do have to calculate these. This is to say this position is still dangerous for FF8, because FFTactics has the good L setup, but it makes sense that this would be the best option, and I think it does show the weakness of this kind of capture in 8 with a 10 facing towards 5. And we happen to have a good L afterwards, and a well-built hand often will have a good L afterwards, but not always, and we gotta check for that. And so this move I think is a little weaker, and even though there's only one tie, I think it's pretty straightforward to find. So the better move is here. The better move is taking such that we, even though we're potentially susceptible to combos down the road, right, we overpowered rather than locking in, because we have weaker numbers facing out, it's a lot easier for us to play moving forward. For instance, now 7 loses to here. When we have played a card in 5, we have locked in 2 cards in 8 and 9, and they have just no combo potential against our card in 5. If there was any serious combo potential here, FF8 would have good play. But again, the hand matchup is quite nice for FFT, and it's just, if FFT's cards land in squares like 5, it's hard for FF8 to get play against it. One really cool tie here, there are a bunch of ties, but like they're all pretty hideous to find, and I would have no faith in myself holding this position. I just thought the coolest tie was this one. Setting up a combo threat in 5, but that combo threat potentially is comboed back in a lot of squares, right? Because it flips everything, so it can be comboed back by Ramza in 4 or Ramza in 3. It is a very messy position, but apparently it does actually lead to a tie. Again, this would be an absolute nightmare to find, and even if you tell me this is a tie, I'm like, really? Really? There's so many possible moves. And like some lines are straightforward, you know, if they block 5, sure, you can go 3, and actually now it's FFT that has to be careful, but this would be a very messy and scary move to make. A key point is there's no safety in 7. Oops, wrong square. So it's kind of hard to find FFT's next move, but it does feel like you find that next move and you should just be winning. You have so much combo potential. Maybe you drop something in 2, you know? There's so much play there. So this is just an incredibly tough position to save, and I think in practice is basically going to win. If you weren't going to play an 8, right? If you decided, okay, I don't like this position, and maybe against this one, pretend they have a combo in 7. What would be the next best move? And I think in general, against these kind of sack corners, the best option is almost always to just take it. But if that isn't best, the next best option is an adjacent corner facing the strong side that gives you a capture that they don't share. Which is to say, I think the next best move is something like either this or this. Now, the reason I don't like it quite as much is it does give up a lot of our rightward power. But either of our cards with a 7 down set us up in 6. They still don't have a recapture in 6. So we still threaten to go in 8. But now we could also go in 6. They don't have that square either. And also, maybe the other one's better here. Because we have combo potential in 8, it can be really hard for them to go in 6. And I think that should generally be the backup plan. Is if you don't like the immediate captures, look for an adjacent corner facing the strong side, facing the side they can't take back, that sets you up really well there too. Let's give another example. That's our first one. We're going to move pretty quickly through these. How should we take? Well, we have multiple captures, but we should know already this one is much less likely to be good. You know, if they take here, apparently this move is winning, but you have to find this at the end. Again, we could slow down and check this, but the point is not actually to have calculated everything, and playing out these games on your own would be a good way to do that. But it is to say, we don't expect this move in 2 to be that good. 7, 3, 8, and 2. You know, it locks in a card. It's going to be favorable to us, but it's probably not the best we can do given the 10 facing down. I think this is the coolest tie here, where Adia is really nice in both 3 and 5. Now, this does concede a lot of ground, so if we check this out a bit further, to get it to work, you really have to see a critical move at the end, which is the only ties here are to go in 7. But this shows how nicely FF8's hand works together, right? Once Squall goes in 7 with Cypher in 1, Adia in 5, you'll notice all the cards being kind of interacted with in 1, 5, and 7 are cards FF8 has laid down. Kyros is great at recapturing them. And this is a common thing with the hand. And similarly, if we start with Kyros, now Squall is great at recapturing, right? This hand is really good when it can work off itself, and is going to be able to find ties like this when it has ways to, all the cards on the board are its own. They're going to click pretty well. And by on the board, I don't mean everywhere, but I mean all the showing cards are theirs. FF8's hand will play really well. And one of the lines we saw earlier that was a problem was when an FFTactics card landed in 5 and FF8's hand didn't play well off it. But this is still clearly really dangerous. If you have to find a move like this in 6, which looks really scary to play, you're conceding kind of both 1 and 3 forever, then it's hard to find the ties after. This is clearly very dangerous. I think 9-5-3A and 2 is also an option. This, of course, requires a lot more calculation because it can be comboed. There is a combo back. There is a combo back on that. In fact, 2 different ways to do so. And there is a combo back on that. And at the end, FFTactics wins. But here there actually are saves, but again, they're a nightmare to find. So 3 is hard to play. This is a tough position. Again, this puts a lot of pressure on the player just by capturing immediately. And sometimes we have to calculate lines. I think between these 2 options of how to capture, we should want to play this way, because we don't want the 10 facing towards 5. This is much likely to be harder for them to find a tie. And even though this move does tie, who's going to play it when it walks into this and you see, oh, I can't combo at the end? What are you going to do? So that's really scary. And again, I think in practice, this is probably going to win. Well, in practice, this is going to be an easier... actually, this one does lose. Yeah, this is a nightmare. And this is a nightmare. They're both nightmares. I think in general, the lower numbers facing out should be preferred, but these are really difficult positions to play. Another thing to look for is it's good to keep more power facing the action, and 9-5-3A, of course, faces the action better than 7-3A8, which is probably part of the reason that this one also looks really good. But both look really strong. Again, this is a weak starter type, but we're trying to figure out how to best exploit it. Here's another move. This loses by force. However, if we look at either of the cards with a 7 up, they are both comboed and the 10 facing out is safe. So we have ruled out 2 of our potential captures. This doesn't capture. We should be noting each time they don't have the capture back in 8. That's really important to check. We're not just capturing because we can, we're capturing because they cannot capture back. Now, because they've used Kyros, this is a safe capture, and this one gets comboed, and this is a safe capture, in the sense that we're not comboed back. How to choose between A873 and A595. I think in practice, both of them are almost certainly going to win. I don't remember what the ties were here, but they were just an absolute nightmare to try to find for the first turn player. Technically, if you want to spend time working on this, it turns out this one is technically a win, while this one there is some obscure weird way to save the position. I don't remember what it is. It's not the first move you'd look at. Like, I don't think it was here. And I think specifically it wasn't here because then FFT blocks 5. And again, when FFT can place a card in 5 while doing something else useful, while like locking a card in, FF8's cards don't play that well off FFT's cards here. And that's often going to be the way to lock in the win. So it was something obscure here. You could spend a while trying to find it, but this move wins by force. In practice, both moves are going to win. Alright, other move. First, we note they don't have the recapture in 2. We have many ways every single card in our hand can take in 4, but we should be able to say, okay, what gets comboed? A595? That can be comboed. Do I have a combo back? No, probably not that one. What else? 7-3-A8. They still have Kyros in their hand. That's going to be comboed. We're going to combo that back? No, we're not. That's probably not the way, right? So we can eliminate those. We can also say that using our 10 to the left, sort of giving up our power, specifically also gives up safety here. And so it's going to be easier for first turn to hold this game. So we probably should be choosing between 7A74 and A873. Now, 7A74 turns out to be really, really strong, but it does have that 10 facing 5, so when choosing between those moves, it probably shouldn't be our preference. And indeed, here, FF8 just about snags a tie by capturing it. At least they lock in something. Again, this is going to be a difficult road for FF8 to hold, but it does hold with perfect play. However, A873, we should expect to be slightly better, and here that slight better is the difference between probably winning in practice to actually winning no matter what. And so, again, it fits kind of the principles we've come up with. It doesn't have a strong number facing towards 5, right? We can take from 5 if need be. We also might be able to play off that number, because an 8 to the right, of course, plays well with Vormav's 8 to the left. It gives us recaptures. It doesn't walk into combos. It's a nice move. Something else I want to point out here, though, is there's actually another winning move, and it comes from our backup plan. If we don't like the captures, we play an adjacent corner, setting up against the strong side, that gives us a capture in the middle square, but not them. And so, perhaps unsurprisingly, this move is actually really strong, and part of the reason it's so great is we also, A8, 7, 3, and 4 is actually a plus wall. So we actually have combo potential against 1, which makes it harder for them to block 2. And this actually wins as well. Now, again, that doesn't make it better than just capturing immediately. The instinct should very much be capture immediately, but occasionally that won't really work. And in those cases, this is the kind of move we want to look for. A5, 9, 5, and 3 is also a really strong move. It happens not to technically win, but it's also going to be pretty high pressure. Again, giving us a capture in 2. But here it's not, it's shared, right? Here they're now 6, 9, 8, 4 is really good. And so we'd expect it to be clearly worse, right? We want the one that is a non-shared capture in the combo square. All right, another awful move from them. This one, in fact, loses 3 different ways. Now, we have a number of ways to capture, and they're all kind of appealing. Now, I think A595, right, appeals less, but it's messy because, like, they combo back, we combo, they combo, right? you really have to check a long line there, and there obviously you don't have to take the combos immediately. So, but I would generally speaking veer away from the ones that can be comboed, which leads us to ignoring that. I guess nothing else can be comboed. Apparently after this, Cypher 7 ties. You know, walking into this, which seems scary, but I guess you do have the combo and they don't have 5 anymore. Cypher ties there, apparently. 7A, 7, 4, and 8. Apparently Cypher also ties there, which does look scarier. Or again, they don't have 5 there. Yeah, not as scary. Yeah. 953A and 8 kind of just does everything really well. It is recapturable from 5 if needed. Our opponent doesn't have 7. You know, it also doesn't give up any power facing towards the action. So it's kind of unsurprising this wins, but it's also unsurprising that like pretty much anything else in 8 and is also very hard for them to tie. Now, what if we weren't going to play 8? Well, we'd want to play facing the strong side in an adjacent corner and setting up something that they don't have shared. This would be a really nice way to do so, giving us 6, but not them. And just a cool solver win. Again, would never play this in real life, but A5, 9, 5, 6. There are certainly like the Tezukas and the Villalbas might, but kind of saying like, you don't have a card to put in 8. But it kind of looks like they do, right? Like, this gets comboed, sure. But you're no longer comboing either of these. Yeah, you have Cypher comboed as well, I admit this. But I could put something in 8, but the problem is either card I could put in 8 has an A to the left, so then blue just goes in 5 and starts locking stuff in. And I think a funny example of this is not there, I'm at 5, is if you take the combo, everything gets flipped back. And the combo chains just don't work. But this is really messy and weird and computery. Like, if you tell me there are 3 wins here, there's this, and there's this, and someone played this one, I would be like, yeah, that feels like they're cheating, right? That's just not a move I would ever do here with the other appealing options. That's another one. 269A, again. Do they have the recapture in 8? Nope. Okay, we're looking at 6. We have 5 different captures in 6. We want to make sure we're not comboed, so we're probably not going with this way. Also, it has a 10 facing towards 5, which should be off-putting to us. If we've drilled down one thing, it should be the 10 facing towards 5 is probably the least good option, because it at least gives the opponent something, some chance at safety. Either of the 10s up are comboed by Kyros, and so we're left with 2 options, 7A, 7, 4, and 7, 3, A8. Again, one of them happens to win, one of them happens not to. Again, in practice, they're probably both going to win. But here, I think it does make some sense that 7, 3, A8 is the better move. 7A, 7, 4 has more power facing to the right, where the game will be facing. It specifically covers everything in 3 except Kyros. And after this, if Kyros goes in 3, it doesn't have the capture. And it's easy for us to, for instance, block 5, right? And lock Kyros in. While if we start this way, they have multiple options. I guess these don't capture either. Again, this is very close to winning, but this one happens to be a little better. And I think even if we don't calculate everything out, the heuristic of what keeps us with more power facing the game, well, obviously this is a lot of power facing the game if we go in 6, and obviously this doesn't have that much power facing the game if we go in 6. So even without doing extensive calculation, I think it's quite possible to get to the right move. And now we're gonna flip sides here. So I'm gonna close this window. You didn't see anything. You actually didn't. And switch the hands. But hopefully we've kind of covered the main tools. And as we see more positions with the hands flipped, maybe you'll like pause or, continue thinking along with me and figuring out which moves make sense in each of these spots. Because I think they make sense. I think there's very clearly a logic to it, and a logic that doesn't require that much calculation. Again, these aren't great starters from our opponent. These are kind of the easiest moves to solve, but I think it's fun to do so. Now, before we go into our next examples, how long have we been going? Half hour. All right. Well, this video will come in under an hour. That's good. I want to discuss hands briefly and just say the FFT hand really is a big hand matchup here. Like the A8-7-3s really play well against the A9-6-4s. The 8 beats the 9 in a combo-y way. The 7 and 3 have had a lot of combos against 6s facing up, and there are multiples of those in this hand. And while A9-6-4s have the potential to combo basically any number, right? Against 10s, when they're paired, it's easy for them to get sames. Against 9s, they have some same walls, some plus walls. Against 8s, they have the 6-4. Against 7s, they have the 6-9. Against 6s, they have the 6-10. Against 5s, they have the 9-4. They have the potential to combo anything, but they do need to be lined up. For instance, to deal with 8s, they need those 8s to be up and down. So Squall Cypher play really well against Terracelis, but not well against Vormav and Islud, because the 8s are left and right. They play well against 7s going left and right, but not so much 7s going up and down. So all the kind of incidental plus walls go in the FFT hand's favor, and really line up well for the FFT hands. And I think this is useful to think about if you know someone's going to play a hand and want to build a counter hand. Because I think this is the kind of stuff where like it suddenly just becomes really difficult for the other person to play. And so in this hand matchup, FFTactics actually I think has a really solid advantage. And I don't know if it's the better hand. I think it is almost certainly the weaker hand. But in the specific matchup, the FFTactics hand has a really big advantage because the incidental plus walls kind of all work in its favor. It doesn't put out numbers that are great. For FF8, right? FF8 wants to see 7s left and right. Instead, all the 7s are up and down. It wants to see 8s up and down. All the 8s are left and right. The FFTactics hand wants to see 10s left and right. It sees that. It wants to see 6s up and down. It sees that, right? It sees that Ramza also can play off 6s up and down. It sees the things it wants to see. And so this ends up being a matchup favorable to the FFTactics hand. I did not do this on purpose. Again, hopefully we're going to try out more hands as I keep going on this. But I thought, and also sometimes Adia 7 is just safe. That's a starter I didn't mention that Deli did, but of course that can sometimes be the best starter. But it actually has that handled really comfortably. So again, it just happens to line up really well here. So that is just to say the hand matchups favor FFT. In general, FF8's terrible starters, FFTactics was winning against a lot of them, or very, very close. FFTactics' dumb starters tend not to be as punishable here. It's probably not going to lose. It's probably going to walk into pressure, but should be savable. Let's look through a few. Here, there's no recapture in 6, so we want to take from 8. If we take from 8 with a 10 facing left, we're comboed. So that rules out Kuros and Irvine. We probably don't want to do it with it also, Adia gets comboed. Right? And Cypher is comboed. So really it looks like Squall is the only choice. Yeah. And Squall is indeed the best choice. And in fact, yeah, FFTactics has only one tie. Not an obvious move. They must find... first of all, this one, the kind of obvious move I'd look at, but just loses. The L is terrible for you. Again, we're looking mostly from the second turn's perspective now. The only tie is... this. Does set up 5. Does give some play in 7. Does have the plus wall in 1 with a 10 facing out. It makes sense that this could hold, but this is obviously a difficult position, and this is the only way to save it. Again, obviously these starters aren't good, but we should get good at identifying what the best way to punish them is. Incidentally, if you want practice playing against bad starters like this, AI Jack will play undefended corners quite regularly, and I do think the best strategy against him should be to either take or play an adjacent corner against the strong side, depending what's possible. Now, this doesn't mean you'll get this every game. Sometimes he'll have the recaptures, but he will play them whether or not he has the recaptures. And so AI Jack is a good way to play a few of these if you want to play some more. All right, this one has the 4 facing out. Cloud Heiress has this well covered. Against all the kind of same wall plus walls work in FFT's favor. Similarly, what else is comboed? Cypher is comboed in 3 as well by Delita. AA3-3, there's no recap in 3. This is not bad, but FFT should look to go in 5. They at least get to lock in the card in 2. It's nice to have the recap. And so that leaves us with either Irvine or Kyros in 2. I'd probably pick Irvine because I'd like to have more power remaining towards the action, and Kyros is clearly better going up, but both are very strong, and the solver doesn't really think there's much difference between them. Neither is winning by force, but both FFT has to be so careful to hold a tie, and it looks pretty terrible. This one in 3, there's no recapture in 6, so we look at 2. We have 2 captures in 2. Which should we go with? They both have a drawback. 6-9-A4, well, actually that gets comboed, and it has the A towards 5, so that's a pretty huge drawback. So we're left with AA3-3. Now in this case, it is clearly the best choice, but it does leave us really weak going up, or relatively weak. We still have some power, Squall, but it's a card we would have liked to hold on to, and we don't get to here. And I think this is a spot where their starter actually isn't so bad. We're certainly going to be comfortable. We should never lose this game. They're the one that's going to have to be careful, but we're not actually getting huge advantage out of the starter. Also, one thing I thought was interesting here was Squall 9 is actually losing to Delita in 6. We're just playing Squall 9 is just so susceptible to combos in 8. It just doesn't work out great, even though it looks like a very natural move to make as Kyros plays well off it, but actually doesn't work here at all. If you play an 8, I think they can just block 2. There's not a way to go in 8 and set up a threat in 5, so the L's aren't very promising. After 8, maybe red could play 7 as well. Either 7 or 2 is likely to be pretty strong. Maybe even 4, depending on the move. But, if you still don't have this capture in 2 because you're comboed, and this capture is probably your best try. It doesn't set up 5, so I haven't checked what the move is here, but I'd guess a move in 8 could be pretty strong here. I'd guess something in 8. Also, you're just going to get so swept going up-down, which really draws me to 8. Trying to have 8 and 5 get blocked, so FFT just dominates on the up-down. So it turns out that one's losing. Another thing I thought looked potentially appealing is Cypher in 5, setting up Squall to have both 2 and 6. I think most people who play this hand would kind of play this automatically. It looks really good. And it's fine. But it turns out, actually, red is not in much danger here. Which is a little weird, but if you just play out a few moves, it turns out red usually is not having too much trouble getting to a tie. And so I don't think this is a particularly better move than Adia in 2, though I would be intimidated seeing it. But apparently not so scary. I'd like to come back to that at some later point and try to figure out why there are a bunch of spots here where I checked a 5 setup and the solver was like, yeah, this isn't very scary. And I'm not entirely sure why that is, so I'd like to return to that at some point. So that's a note I've left to myself. Yeah, alright, let's move on to our next one. We want to capture in 6. We only have one way to do so. It doesn't get comboed back. It does get comboed back. This one's actually a decent starter because we don't have a great way to capture it. We don't have a great way to set up in 7. Our capture is potentially comboed back. We have a bunch of L options, and I think this move should be good here. Didn't actually check. I'll check now. Tell me, O solver. Yeah, this move ties. But this is actually a pretty decent starter, right? This is kind of the time when when these starters look as good as they're going to look is basically because you have very few captures, and the ones you do, I have combos back. And so this is the only kind of Sac Corner starter of this type that gets played, but that's because it's not really a Sac Corner. And this one's a pretty decent starter, actually. A5, 9, 5, and 7. Well, if we follow so far, we see they don't have a recapture in 4, so it's very appealing to grab an 8. You just grab a card. Which way are we going to do so? Well, we don't want to walk into a combo, so we don't want to play it this way. This doesn't capture, this doesn't capture, so we're left with 2 cards. Neither of them have a big number facing towards 5, so they both are going to be very good here. Probably keep the one that has more down power, which is this one. So probably use Kyros. Both are very good. Neither is a win by force, but against both, FFTactics has to be very precise to hold the tie. About A5, 9, 5, and 9. Well, there's no recapture in 6, so we're looking to capture 8. This gets cap comboed. This gets comboed and has a 10 facing towards 5. So again, we're looking at these 2 cards. They both have 10s facing towards 7, which is kind of a bummer. Probably keep the one with more down power. So again, I think Kyros is the better pick here. And in fact, there's only 2 ties here, and while they are in the squares you'd look at, which cards they are isn't obvious. I think there's 1 in 5 and 1 in 7, but it's not, as I recall, it's not like the cards you'd expect. Or at least there's a decent chance you'd go wrong picking. Even if you knew there's a card in 7 that ties, that wouldn't tell you which one to play. So again, really high pressure. Again, these are a bad starter type, but we're just trying to get precise at punishing them. Well, we have 2 ways to take. One is comboed, ergo, we're doing it with the other one. And again, this is hard to say if there's only 1 tie. Again, I could tell you it's a move in 7, and that still wouldn't mean you'd get it, right? There are 4 moves in 7. This is the only one that ties. Wouldn't have been my guess. The more you know. But that is to say, in practice, this is again incredibly strong, even if it's not a forced win. This one, we do have a forced win. We have 2 ways to capture. One of them is comboed back, so surprise, surprise, it's going to be the other one. This happens to win here. Here, well, this is comboed by Cloud Eris. This is comboed by Vormav. This is not comboed. This is comboed by Vormav. This does not capture. Guess what? It's going to be a Dia. And it does give up so much of our right power. It's our only 10 to the right. So I don't think it's that surprising that FFTactics is doing okay here, and there's still kind of a game to play without huge advantage to either side. But I do think this is still a pretty good reaction. One weakness with the FF8 hand, again, specifically in this matchup, is it doesn't have good ways to set up going kind of in 1 against the move here, right? It doesn't have anything it can put in 1 that sets up a threat in 2, so it doesn't have the kind of adjacent corner play we saw before against these sideways 10s. Potentially a weakness in the hand. On the other hand, it already has the capture, so it doesn't really need it, and there's freedom to kind of go wherever you want. But in general, I actually think red is doing okay here. I also have A8, 7, 3, and 7. And here, this is our last one. I know I haven't done them in a particular order, but this is the last one. We have 3 captures in 8. One of them gets comboed back, and then there were 2. Neither of them is a 10 facing 5. That's great. Probably both are really strong. Probably keep the one with more downward power. Again, start with Kyros, and it's very dangerous for them. So that's 16 of the 90 potential starters. One thing I want to go back to is I think this looks very scary with the Dia being good in 6 and 8. And I think, what's the other one? I think this looks pretty scary, and the solver does not find either scary. So at some point I'm going to go back and investigate those kind of variations. Why is it not impressed by those big setups of a single card? And the reason I didn't do it already is because it thinks there are so many ways to get a tie that I didn't know where to explore, which kind of means I'm evaluating those positions a bit wrong. On the other hand, sometimes they really are very dangerous. So what about these positions makes that not the case? So to conclude, on a defensive front, meaning if we're playing as the second turn player against one of these starters, just throwing in an example, check the captures first, right? Sometimes we have them, they don't have the combos back, they don't have a recapture. If you think, well, this would never happen in a major tournament game, it happened in a quarterfinals of a recent tournament with two good players. Maybe you remember the game, maybe you can figure it out, but both of the players who played in that quarterfinals have made a finals in the return. That's my clue. But this is to say it's being played between very good players. You still sometimes see it. It'll have some justifications, but these moves do exist. They are, on average, just a terrible type of starter, but there are times when there are uses, and the player who played it did not lose that game. So first, look for the capture, look for 8. If you don't have that, looking for a setup against the strong side is usually the next best option. So and you want it to be a non-shared setup, right? You want it to be create something in 4 that they don't have as well. Try not to give safety in the near corner, right? If you're taking an 8, if they don't have safety in 9, that's going to be even better. And so generally holding on to a card that has power in the direction will make it less likely for them to have safety. If they are going to have safety in 9, try to make sure that card doesn't also flip 8, if you can. You know, even in one line we saw, one of the first lines we looked at, Squall in 9 was met by Meliadul Islud in 8, Adia in 7. And that created the double safety in 7 and 8, and yet FFTactics still had good play there. FF8 still had to be pretty careful to hold the tie in that line. But ideally, if they have safety, it doesn't come with a capture of 8. Keep power towards the action, and maybe most importantly of these kind of secondary guidelines, try to have a weaker number facing towards 5. Try to make it easy to recapture the cards you put down. It's usually gives the first turn player a lot more tools if you have a 10 facing 5, because it guarantees they can at least lock in one card. From the first turn player's perspective, these are likely to be really bad starters. Generally speaking, if they can take and you can't take back, especially in a game where there's a limit on how long you can think, this is probably not a type of move worth spending much time on. However, if you notice, oh, they have a lot of redundant numbers in one direction and I can combo that, you might notice, okay, all their captures give me combo potential. Okay, then it's okay, right? Because I'm not really sacrificing the corner. Another reason could be if their only captures are moves that have a 10 facing towards 5, right? If their only capture was something like Squall here, now we could combo that back, but even if we couldn't, we know we can at least lock in one card. Pretend they don't have the combo back at the end, right? Pretend we can just lock in a card here. Or let's actually do it this way. We actually can lock in a card, right? If their only capture has a high number facing towards 5, a max number, we might be able to set up this kind of thing that more commonly comes out of a side starter, but can be a very reasonable way to build out a hand. And unlike a side starter, it's going to be more forcing here, because if they don't grab immediately, we're likely to be able to lock in. So it's very tempting to grab immediately, and maybe we can build out there. But other than that, these are pretty unlikely to be good moves. And more broadly, just talking a little about the hands, the kind of incidental plus walls matter a lot. The A8-7-3, the backside, the 7-3, really hit hard in a lot of spots. And also just like seeing Squall Cypher really good against 7s left and right, not good against 7s up and down. Or just never going to have plus wall potential, and rarely other potential. 8s, well, they're good against them up down, not good against them left right. Again, this Vormav and Islud Meliadul combo is a really solid answer to Squall Cypher, a surprisingly solid answer. It is real play here, and more than it looks like it should have, because A8-7-3s are not spectacular cards. And so I think the kind of lesson for counterhand building here is look for odd matchups like that. If you really think the opponent is locked into a certain card, you can play against that, and you can play against that kind of by cards that just happen to have the right plus walls and never get plus walled back, and happen to have the right stuff up and down. Now, if you see the person likes this FF8 hand, but when they don't play it, they will rotate to a sideways version of it. Well, a sideways version of this hand probably destroys our hand, right? Say a double Una hand, right? Suddenly those 6/4s are picking off our 8s every time. Suddenly those 9/6s can pick off our 7s, or not every time, but a decent chunk. So this hand probably lines up really poorly against a double Una hand, but really well against a Squall Cipher hand. So got to be careful on the counter handing here, but it is one way to think about counter hands. I think that's all I've got to say here. Next time we'll move on to a different type of starters or different modes. And hopefully through exploring this game, we can get a good feel to kind of where to look against all of them and just reasoning out moves. Again, this was the simplest. Other ones will be more complicated. I'll probably go more in depth on the variations because I think they'll follow in more important and useful ways. But in general, don't play this type of starter. But when you see it, you should really look to capture. There have been other moves that were strong. The adjacent corner facing the strong side, occasionally other weird plays. But in general, this is so likely to be the best move. So likely that it's where you should spend a lot of your time looking. And as seen here, it should be pretty quick just based on heuristics without much calculation to figure out which has a good chance to be the best.